Hello, and welcome everyone to our January presentation of the Nasher 360 Speaker Series. I'm Curator of Education Anna Smith, and today I'm pleased to introduce artist Tony Tasset, whose eye has been a fixture across from the Joule Hotel since August. Tony Tasset's witty sculptures contend with weighty ideas drawn from modernism, postmodern theory, popular culture, and universal human emotions, while remaining refreshingly straightforward and accessible. From a 94-foot rainbow stretching over the Sony lot in Culver City, California, to a melty Blob Monster, to the massive eyeball we know and love, Tasset's iconic public sculptures are instantly captivating. As these works provoke stares and social media posts from those who encounter them, they also explore the inclination of the human mind to assign meaning, to think that there must be something more to what we see. As the artist has observed, people have been so conditioned not to understand art that when something's obvious, they feel like they're missing something. Tasset's work is held in the permanent collections of prestigious museums across the U.S., including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, the Museum für Moderne Kunst Frankfurt, and the San Francisco Museum of Art. In addition, he has been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions in countries around the world, including Canada, Ecuador, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Tasset received his MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and his BFA from the Art Academy of Cincinnati. He is currently a university scholar at the University of Illinois at Chicago and will be featured in the upcoming Whitney Biennial. I got to hear him speak a little bit this morning, so I know that we're all in for a treat. So please join me all in welcoming Tony Tasset.
Thank you. This is such a great turnout. I'm absolutely thrilled. So I will try to be entertaining. And I have a lot of stuff to show. I've probably put too many images in here, so if it looks like I'm rushing at some point, it's because I'm trying to get to some newer work. And maybe we'll have time for a couple of questions at the end. So I was born in 1960 in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is a picture called My Parents, and it's self-explanatory. I thought this was... You know, I've also taught for a long time, and there's certain critics or certain professors that are kind of the psychoanalytic type. So I thought this was kind of my psychoanalytic self-portrait, even though it really doesn't say that much about me. But I'll get back to this piece in a little bit, but I thought it was a good starting point. It's just me kind of showing my colors, showing who I am. But let's go back to the early 80s, or mid to late 80s, to start with. And I start here for a couple of reasons. It's when I began my kind of professional career. Artists don't like to be called professional, but I'll say that anyway. And this was work that got some attention, and I do think there are some things in it, although my work has changed a lot, that continue throughout the work in interesting ways, even though the form has changed. So anyway, I did these early pieces called domestic abstractions, and they were simply framed cow hides or other animal hides. The inserts are made of leather and suede, and the idea was that you know, I was a young artist. I was actually in school when I started these pieces, but I was also working for a really good gallery, Rona Hoffman Gallery in Chicago, and got into some great collections. And I started to think about, well, why do people collect? And I really began to realize the power of the collector and how museums and institutions really began with individual collectors. So as a kind of an homage to that, I guess you'd say, I made these pieces called domestic abstractions. And the idea was that, you know, at a certain, in some ways, a hunter who would, you know, shoot a giant animal and put their head on their wall, I thought that the contemporary painting, the modern painting, was sort of a version of that in a way. It was a symbol of power. And I was trying to bring those analogies together. I was inspired by a Corbusier chaise lounge that actually had a de Kooning over it. That's where I got this idea. So the first ones were very, you know, referenced other artists like Gottlieb, for example. After a while, I thought the inclusion of the leather and suede was sort of too much of my hand. I wanted them to be more ready-mades. And I was really I was inspired by a lot of 70s conceptual art, but I also knew it wasn't the 70s. I was born too late. So I think I wanted to comment on that And so I was inspired by people like Saul LeWitt, who talked about trying to make art without the artist's hands in it. So I just added shopping to that kind of list. And I would make these pieces by going to these furriers in New York and sort of finding the paintings in the fur as opposed to making the paintings. And for me, nature, pop culture, and art are sort of the three things that seem to spin around in my work. And it's not like I'm a big nature dude necessarily, but I think of nature as this sublime, as this sort of a kind of a sublime perfection that we're trying to get to. Clifford Still, maybe. Newman Zip. Here's a Japanese watercolor. Maybe a Mount Fuji, maybe a Turner painting. After a while, I realized, I really came from painting, and my degree is in painting. It's what I knew more about. I'll tell you a little story. When I was working at the gallery, somebody came in, and there was a Robert Mangold painting she wanted to buy. And she looked at this, and she said, "Oh, fantastic. I've been wanting to buy a Mangold for years, and this is finally the right color." And some people were sort of horrified by that, but I liked it. I mean, I liked the idea that the art was, no matter how important the art was, no matter how absolutely essential to art history it was, it still had to match the drapes and go above the couch. So I think in this piece, I sort of smashed the couch and the painting together. Here's a bench that has plexiglass on the top. A surreal kind of trick. Take something functional and make it not functional. So the point of this work is that it's slippery. You're not sure, is this art? Is it fashion? Is it furniture? And I'm trying to sort of say, like, all of this stuff informs each other. All of it is context. See, now that this is where I have to start speeding up because I'm talking too much. And it's still very obvious references to other artists. This is called button progression. So a lot of artists and minimalists like Donald Judd used progression. I guess I was trying to use real leather as a sort of an idea of what's genuine and what's of value. Funny story about this. This is called Wedge Bench. This was at a party. Actually, somebody mentioned Lou Manilow. This was at his, he's a very big collector in Chicago. This was at a big loft kind of party. And there was a well-known architect there, and I saw him try to sit on this thing. He had a drink in his hand. He's kind of sliding down it. And I just, he couldn't, is this, hip Italian furniture, or is it art? And I love that this thing had that, it has this, you weren't sure what to place that. And all of that is trying to put it, trying to make the art not so, it's trying to make the art in a little bit, like I said, slippery position to sort of put more on the viewer as to where value is. I think value and sort of how things get value, that's the other theme, or one of the many themes that run through the work. This was the last one I did. It's about 4 foot square. And I remember I got a kind of a negative review in a newspaper in Chicago that said, "Oh, this thing is like a yuppie BMW version of an Eva Hesse box." And I thought, isn't an Eva Hesse even more of a symbol than a BMW? So in a way, to me, even though it was supposed to be negative, I thought it affirmed kind of what the work was about. And I also like this piece because it turns it all into a coffin in a way. There was an article by Donald Cuspit back in the 80s, and he was kind of criticizing artists who were appropriating, and he called them necrophiliacs because they were looking at the past and sort of living on the dead artist. And I just, whenever something's negative, I go towards it instead of away. I sort of embrace it. But after a while, I thought all the leather and fur was kind of too seductive, and I was losing the critical edge in the work. So I got rid of a lot of the seduction, but I still talked about these kind of empty vitrines. So I thought of this piece, still inspired, still appropriation, inspired by Saul LeWitt. But I like the idea that, is this a model for a utopian city, or is it a jewelry case where the jewelry's been taken away at the end of the night? I like that ambiguity. Is this something that it's just painted green, although it refers to like green felt at a museum or display case or display place. This is called Collector. Boxed set. Eventually, they got more and more minimal. I kept thinking, no, less seduction, less seduction. So I began to actually carve into the walls and make these kind of fake vitrines in the wall. So I get real super minimal now. These are, that slipperiness, again, is this something that hasn't been installed yet, or has it just been deinstalled? I like putting the artwork in this place where the viewer has to scratch their head and they're not sure. This is cast glass, bubble wrap. I think these are also a little homage to my, I was an art preparator, so palette. I thought that the language of art was starting to become maybe, I wanted to open it up to metaphors beyond art. So I think of these things as empty frames, empty vitrines, things that you, meaning the viewer, sort of metaphorically fills up. People made a big deal out of the fact that I used all these fabricators and I didn't use my own hand in anything. And I like to never be too much in a pattern and to try to contradict myself. So just as a way of moving along. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give them a mark. I'm going to give them my mark, but I'm going to make it the most banal, generic mark you could. And I played around with, I took pretzels and chewed around the edge, or I took beer bottles and tore the labels off. And it was a way of, I thought about them as like three-dimensional doodles, things that we do that we don't think of them as sculpture, but I thought, well, it's kind of making a sculpture. Anyway, I made this piece where this is the only one that came of that, where I just took a styrofoam cup, tore it into a spiral, and then had it cast in bronze, painted white, and lays on the floor, sits on the floor. So, here's a story that I like to tell about this piece that I think really describes a lot of what my work is about, that slippery area again. So I showed this piece in a show in Switzerland many, many years ago, and it was a big show with lots of artists from around the world, and we were all supposed to bring the things with us. They didn't have shipping costs, so we had to bring so I brought this cup, put it out in this exhibition, and there was an assistant curator who I said, I was a little worried about it. Maybe we ought to put it against the wall. I was worried somebody was going to step on it. And at that point, she didn't know what I had brought. And we kind of scurry out into, she goes, let me see. And we scurry out into the gallery, and we look at this cup on the floor. And it looks just like a regular styrofoam cup, right? So she looks at me and kind of looks at the cup and looks at me and says, this is what you made for us? We flew you out here. We put you up, and you give us this, And I kind of sheepishly said, well, you invited me. It's kind of what I do. And I said, it is bronze. And the moment I said it was bronze, loved it, genius, brilliant. She loved it. And I thought, why? Because it didn't look any different at all. But there was something that somehow that knowledge of bronze was the thing that named it important. And I think that's, that runs through a lot of my work. Abstraction with this is a bronze. I saw one time at a gallery a Donald Judd stack, and somebody was, drinking a drink, and they put the drink, when they were finished, they put it on the Donald Judd stack. And I thought, this was actually a famous artist, too, who did this. And I thought, wow, they didn't even recognize that as art. And I thought in the same way, this bronze, that if I put this hat on it, this kind of red polyester sort of worker's hat, it dismissed the art object and also sort of personified this thing. Continuing to think about making a mark, I made this photograph called Spew, and I was thinking about lots of famous photographs. A photograph of Jackson Pollock throwing paint, Richard Serra throwing hot lead. There's a famous photograph of Salvador Dali jumping up in the air with the milk and a cat, I think is. And even the horrible photographs from Vietnam, I was trying to sort of bring all of that stuff, but put myself into that or recreate that kind of an image. So I think now the appropriation's still there, but it's more about almost sort of summarizing things into an image, into an iconic, clear image. And I was saying a little earlier, I was out by the eye, and I think something about my work that's a little different than a lot of artists is that a lot of artists, they're trying to be unique. They're trying to have their mark, their special, this is my painting and it doesn't look like any other painting. And I think I try to make art that actually looks like a lot of other stuff. It tries to make my mark kind of ubiquitous with your mark. So for example, maybe you've torn a cup before. So is your mark more or less important than mine? Those are the questions that I'm always asking. Then I did this piece, probably one of my most reproduced pieces, called I Peed in My Pants. And I have to name drop, John Waters owns this piece. But I love this piece, and really what it's about, when you're an artist, or you don't have to be an artist, a lot of us, we want approval, but you also, you want to be sort of in control of it at that same time. So I really think this is a piece that's about sort of wanting your approval, the audience's approval, but sort of being and willing to make a fool of myself to get that approval, but also being in control of that gesture. And it's my transgressive act. It's my transgressive gesture. And yes, I really did pee in my pants, which is wildly taboo, I found out. I mean, it's amazing. And I thought it was funny because, I was really trying to make a human image. And what gave me the idea of this was we were potty training our son, and I realized that when you potty train a kid, it's sort of they have to give up some power. It's their first sort of they're becoming civilized. And they're sort of a little sad about that they have to give it away. So all of that stuff was informed this piece. But I do think it's funny because this was in a show across from a Kathy Opie, where she's carved in her chest and she's got needles through her arms, and people were shocked by my image. And I couldn't understand this, But I think it's interesting because it's so human. We all, as kids, pee in our pants, and it's about sort of an incontinence that I think is about control and being human. And, that's what I was thinking about. I even grew a beard at that time. Normally I don't have a beard. I have one today, but I thought it kind of played with masculinity a little bit. I talked about that. Okay, so here's my first eye, and this is it's a photograph of my son's eye. And one of the things I like to talk about this, he was, I think, 8 when I took this. He's 22 now. I would never make an image of God, and I'm not I would just say that, but if I did, I was thinking that the closest thing I could get is my kid's eye, because the kid is sort of looking at me. So in a way, I'm his, my actions are reflected in his life in a lot of ways. And he's a sense of me, of maybe after my death in a way. So I thought, and I like, what I like to say about this is, on one level, a picture of an eye is kind of cliche. It's a photo. It's a very kind of common thing, but this is a deeply personal sort of image to me. And I like that coming together of the universal and the personal, and to me that happens in this piece. This is a painted bronze jack-o'-lantern. Continuing this idea, after the cup, I thought, well, let's do something that's a little more, has some emotion to them, has some humanness to it. And I thought of a jack-o'-lantern as a kind of a mark, a sort of a self-portrait that everybody makes at a certain point, or not everybody, but if you've made a jack-o'-lantern, which a lot of people do, it is a kind of projection, a self-portrait. So again, just like the cup, I'm trying to make a mark that, other people have made. I should say that if you know what the lost wax method is, this is the lost pumpkin method, meaning I carved a real pumpkin and then we burned it out. You sort of covered in a ceramic and then burn it out. So the thing weighs like 400 pounds or something. It's insane. But what I like about that is that it's a magic. A pumpkin is sort of about magic, and then the illusion, the faux part of it, is a sort of a magic trick. So I like all those layers of illusions. And the pumpkin's been a bit of a muse for me over the years. So so if this is mind, this is body. I love how the stem becomes phallic, and this sort of becomes anal a little bit. So it's just big fat man in a way. I showed this at an art fair. I love the idea of sort of like the harvest fair, winter. I like putting that in the context of the art world. So here mortality comes up, the rotting pumpkin, and violence comes up. After 9/11, this is a little out of order how I'm showing the images, but I had made some very, very sweet, happy pieces, sort of like the rainbow and some other works, which actually come after. But 9/11 happened. We went to war. My wife at the time was diagnosed with cancer. She's fine now. It's long gone. But I just couldn't make this super happy piece. And like the jack-o'-lanterns, I was thinking about the body, figures. And the snowman is a figurative sculpture that people make. But I thought, what happens if you take something so dopey and obvious as a snowman, but really treat it with pathos and you treat it as though it's a Giacometti or something. And I also thought, what would happen if you gave him this sad emotion? And a story I talk about this piece is before I made this snowman, there was a big snow in Chicago, and I tried it out first. I made a real snowman in our front yard, and I gave him a sad face. It was a big snowstorm, so up and down my street there were lots of snowmen, right? The next morning after I made it, mine was knocked down. None of the other ones were knocked down. And I really feel like it had to be because of this sad face, that there was something almost sacrilegious or something about giving this snowman, this happy snowman, this expression. But I don't know. That's my theory anyway. So this snowmen have continued over the years. I've made a few of them. But I do think of them as trying to give this obvious thing or this very common thing emotional impact. Just in case you're interested, it's made of resin and crushed glass, and the leaves are made of brass that's been cut and painted, and the arms are bronze, but all sort of hand done originally. I thought of this as the sort of ADD kid a little bit. Here's snowman with yellow glove. This is a fairly recent snowman with scarf. This is actually all made out of epoxy. That's all hand done. All right, going back a little bit. This is a cherry tree. It's a copy of a cherry tree that I made that is in our backyard, or was. It actually died, sadly. But I thought of it as just this beautiful, where those early pieces I was framing nature, right, the cowhide pieces. Now I'm sort of duplicating nature. The poem, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Well, the last line is only God can make a tree. And I thought, I'll challenge that. I'll give that a try. So I made this tree out of, it's wax over steel. But it's, over the top, sentimental, beautiful, but it is also like a real thing in my life. I enjoy I did enjoy, the spring when these little flowers start to burst out on this cherry tree. It's like the most beautiful thing I could imagine. So I thought if I was doing this thing about life, I had to do a thing about death, and this is just a taxidermied blue jay. I had this idea for a long time, but it's actually illegal to, kill a blue jay. So I had to wait, and a friend of mine found one in his backyard. And one day I came home, and there was a blue jay in a plastic bag on my porch. I guess I thought about, a secular description of death, but also just, looking at death straight on, but the most common sort of thing. It's funny because I think this is sort of sad if it's laying on the floor. It's, I find it sort of heartbreaking, but other people look at it and it's like, oh, it's a dead rat. They think it's sort of disgusting. Interestingly, I showed this is in a show in a couple of years ago, and I have some other pieces that maybe are controversial, but there was a Native American couple that came in, and they were really offended by this piece because to just leave this thing on the floor. Anyway, interesting. Mud pies, I'm going to just keep moving. So I go through some, darker periods here. This is called Capucine Chandelier, and it's based on these chandeliers that Capuchin monks make. And I just thought of it as the most decadent thing. But it's also like a memento mori. You know, I thought about it sort of, a chandelier I thought of as a sign of culture. But I also wanted to remind you, like, you know, even though I'm a very, very lapsed Catholic, I always love that idea of dust to dust. So it's a sort of a reminder, you know, as you're eating your dinner. It actually is over somebody's dining room table, which I like a lot. This is called Grotto. Thinking about a lot of these pieces were somewhat inspired by the various wars that we've been in, and I was thinking about war memorials are often minimalist, you know, granite. It's sort of minimalism with names in it. And I thought that, in a way, how would you make a memorial that also sort of acknowledged the violence and the sadness of it? So this is the inside of that. But it's also a little surreal object. Same thought. I mean, this is sort of the saddest piece I've ever done. You know, there was an article in the New York Times about memorials and about after tragic events, these memorials pop up. And I thought, well, how could you possibly really make a memorial to a war? And like a, what's that called, a method actor, I was thinking, well, what's the saddest, you know, how could I personalize that? And my son was 15 at the time, and I thought how, you know, horrible it would be. I only have one child to send them off. So I made this piece. It's loosely based, or it's based on one of the lesser-known pietas that Michelangelo made. It was an unfinished pieta, not the most famous one. But it's supposed to be me and my son. Now, you know, that's what inspired me, but I also think it's just about sort of the vulnerability of being a father. I don't know if anybody has like a 15-year-old boy is scary because they're, you know, they have no fear. So it was about a kind of a projection of like the saddest projection I could have about sending your kid away, or maybe, but I think it's a little more open than that. Maybe it's a father getting his kid out of a rave or something. But I think it is about a kind of, you know, it is about a kind of being a father in a way. Same thing. This was my son. It's loosely it's called Hard Rain, and it's based on a Bob Dylan album cover. Prada shoebox. It's been turned into bronze. This is this is what I thought would irritate people, but they were upset about the bird on the floor. This is cast aluminum that's been painted. You know, just the sacred and the profane. I mean, it's funny, as I go on, I feel, I mean, I can talk about my work forever. I think I like talking about my work more than making it sometimes. But as I go on, the work is sort of so obvious, I'm not sure it's as much to talk about. So I'd made all these kind of sad, dark pieces, and I thought, I wanted to make something a little more positive. And I really wanted to make my sort of peace sign. And this is a photograph called "Why Can't We All Just Get Along?" from the Rodney King quote. And I got a bunch of my students and hired a bunch of, you know, rented a bunch of costumes. And I thought about it as, you know, either the lamb and the lion laying down together, or the idea of mascots, different teams, all, you know, being together. But I really wanted to make this, you know, like corny. I love the love sign by Robert Indiana. I really wanted my version of that. That's sort of over the top, We Are the World album cover kind of artwork. Sometimes you know, never wanting to fall into too much of a pattern, I became concerned about just the expense and the faux stuff. So this is just a very simple piece called Rainbow Rocks, and they're just common river rock that are painted in this. Each one is painted in it's one-shot paint, is this really great enamel paint. The idea was that this is at an art fair, and the idea is you could buy one rock at a time, and no matter what you did, it sort of made a little composition. And the other idea is that anybody could make this, really. And you'll start to see as I go on here, my art gets very close to, you know, I'm interested, I started looking at fine art, modernism, minimalism, conceptual art, but I'm also looking now at folk art, at, you know, the guy that paints the rocks in the front of their you know, puts them on the end of their driveway. Duchamp talked about the infra-thin, and I think this is an infra-thin between sort of art and just decoration. But it's funny, because the idea really was that anybody could make this, but still people bought them, and they want to know that they're special and that they're arranged specially. And that's my dog. Okay, now to, this is the first public commission I did. It's in Pittsburgh. And what I did is I made a saucer magnolia trees. You know the magnolia trees with the big fat pink flowers. I hand sculpted one of them out of clay and wax and other materials, cut it all apart, had it cast twice in bronze, painted realistically, and it goes in it sets in a little grove of real magnolia trees. So, you know, for a week out of the year, it matches the real trees. And it's supposed to just, you know, it's a little fairy tale moment in downtown Pittsburgh as you walk through this. I mean, this is one of those pieces, I don't know there's a lot to say about it. It's pretty obvious. This is earlier, so that it's the trees and the ivy around it have grown up quite a bit. I think there's 900 flowers on each tree. And they're all, each flower is individual. They were made of pieces and then put together and sort of changed. Here's the Chicago version. I made it looks like a dirty pile of snow that's in a store window. And what I like about these pieces is that even though they're still pieces, they have a dynamic relationship with their surroundings. So you can see these in the snow, or, you know, this, when it's snowing outside, it matches, and then in the summer, you're looking at this and like it's an omen of what's to come, perhaps. But I also, I mean, when I first moved to Chicago, those big piles of dirty snow, I just thought they're sublime in a way, and they're such a collaboration between nature and culture that create these things. So it looks just like a snow shovel plowed this thing into the corner. It's also sort of a funny take on like a Christmas display. So, and all this stuff is faux, right? It's made out of epoxy, and even the little bottle cap there, if you can see the little old-style bottle cap, it's all handmade, and there's little cigarettes. One has a lipstick. So, you know, it's when you make, I mean, when I make public art, it's very different than those early pieces that are sort of art about art, some of them. This is really art that's made to speak to everybody. This is a piece in Champaign-Urbana in front of a genome biology building. In the genome biology building, some of the research they were doing there somewhat inspired this. And all it is I took a little piece of clay, smushed it, you know, 2-3 times, and then had them digitally blown up 6, 10, and 12 feet, or maybe a little bigger than that. And it gives this very weird, they look like they were just popped out of a computer or something. But I loved this look of kind of the hands of God coming down and making this thing. Unfortunately, the artist Urs Fischer has done some very similar pieces after these, which I love, and I like his work. But he's Urs Fischer, and they're in New York, and this is in Champaign-Urbana. So that happens. That'll happen. Okay, another public piece is at Governor State Sculpture Park near Chicago. I won this commission to do a piece there. And this sculpture park has some giant Dessouveros and a lot of modernist, sort of late modernist work, some really great stuff. But it's one of those, public kind of gardens that's way out in the, not in the middle of nowhere, but it's out in the country. And I thought of collapsing, you know, I'm interested in collapsing that high and low. And I thought about, here I've got Paul Bunyan. This piece is called Paul. And Paul Bunyan's usually, he's this, you know, strapping young man. He's usually standing up like that. There's actually 50 Paul Bunyan sculptures across the United States. And I always thought of Paul Bunyan as this symbol of manifest destiny. He played as a kid, and that created the Great Lakes, and he has all this power. And I just thought, again, this was sort of somewhat inspired by the war and by America's changing position in the world. And I just thought, what would happen if Paul, like, you know, was a little over the hill and maybe he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. And so there's sort of implied violence. And I was thinking about, I mean, this is still corny, but or a little embarrassing to admit, but I'm looking at Michelangelo's Moses and thinking of King Lear and really seeing if I can take something so sort of common and somewhat silly, Disney-fied, and give it some angst and some pathos and some history. So I thought about him as, you know, Paul's come out of the woods and he's a little worse for wear. He's got a little pot belly and he's just sad. This is called Blob Monster. You know, there's a great, last time I was here, there's a great Linda Banglis sculpture. I was thinking of this pour as a sort of a modernist gesture, but taking that modernist gesture and collapsing it with this, you know, Scooby-Doo kind of monster. I mean, I'm always trying to take the piss out of art in some ways or another, I guess. It's an easy way of saying it. This is a kind of a relatively new series. I mean, the art world it's an interesting time because art fairs are so big now, and I've shown a lot of work at art fairs, and I think somewhat inspired by that, I've created this series of paintings, in quotes, called Spill Paintings. And you know, you can see a lot of my things collapse like this art gesture with a jokey gesture or another gesture. So I thought of that gag where it looks like a Coke can has been spilled or something, and those began to inspire a series of paintings. I actually think these are somewhat similar to the fur paintings, but those were using very high art kind of materials, and this is really using like the stuff of our toxic, beautiful world that we live in. My wife said that she thought my best work had this kind of human emotional element to it, so I added the UIC Mom cup, and I thought that helped that. I mean, I thought that did give it this resonance. And they have funny titles that are just words from the products. I think this is called Goo. Oh, I can't remember the titles exactly. This one's called Nighttime Relief. Oh, I can't remember all the titles. This is called something French. This is called Pro Fluff. And just in case you're wondering what it's made of, it's the objects are real, but the material coming out of it is resin and other stuff. A little Pollocky. This is a new piece that isn't really finished yet, called Food Painting. It's a bad slide, but I've basically bought every kind of fake food I could online. You know, it's obvious. It's consumer culture. I mean, it's obvious, but it's also, I should say that, yes, you can talk about this as sort of what it means, but I'm also interested in, I mean, you look at when you see this piece in person, it kind of makes you a little bit nauseous. So like the fur pieces, even though, yes, there's a conceptual element, I'm very aware of what the things mean, you know, how to read them, but I'm also just interested in how something that has a visceral response. So you look at this, or you look at fur, or even the eyeball in a lot of ways, and it kind of gets you in the gut, you know, but even though you can intellectualize it. So I'm interested in that almost first. So even though this is could be construed as a didactic piece, I am very interested in how it physically affects you. This is a mirror that says shame. It's kind of like the chandelier. I told you I was raised Catholic, so I have this in my house, as you know, when you walk in the house and you have a mirror to look at yourself, so it's pretty funny. This is also kind of new and not a very good photograph, but It's always important to incriminate myself in these things, so I've had these embarrassing shoes going back a few years, and I just poured resin all over them. Okay, this is called Hot Dog Man. This is where it gets a little blue, the lecture. You know, in Chicago, there are these great fiberglass hot dog men in front of hot dog stands. So there's a sort of a tradition of that kitschy stuff. But this is really my homage to Chicago and a certain Chicago history, the Imagists, the Harry Who. And it's this out-of-control hot dog man. You know, I could talk about a lot of artists that inspired this piece. R. Crumb, the hand, you know, this hand is even looking at Hindu imagery of hands. Peter Saul, but he's also, this poor guy is, you know, he's leaking from all of his orifices. So I think it's also about mortality, the flesh, all that stuff, you know. It's kind of disgusting. Although it's funny because I thought that this guy is a kind of a sad, pathetic guy, but my wife again thought that he had a certain American positivism to him. You know, he's still trying no matter what. She's saying no. She's shaking her head. This is just called Bear. You know, looking at this is. I mean, some of these I can't completely explain. But I thought about this bear as a sort of a mascot, you know, Yogi the Bear or those Wisconsin sort of, that genre. But I gave him these sort of psychedelic eyes. And if you look at him and you can see my thumbprints, I was thinking about Rodin. And I don't know if this figure, I don't know, I thought of this bear as kind of the fat, maybe the American, the kind of a naive figure who's either something is either, you know, changing his vision or his vision's going out. So it's, you know, taking that vernacular language that I'm interested in and treating it with a surreal or psychedelic approach. This piece is called Mood Sculpture, and it's based on, you know, you go to the doctor and you have to look at a thing that says your pain level, or I saw this book on psychology, and it was like, how happy are you? Look at one of these. So based on that, I made this piece. It's about, I think it's 8 feet tall or 7 feet tall. Yeah, I think it's 8 feet tall. And it's, you know, I thought about it as just how we try to not put labels, what's the word? How we try to, yeah, I guess put labels on everything or push everything to an emotional, like we're always looking for happiness and whether that's a good thing or not. Interesting, I'm actually up for another public commission in Kansas City, and it's in front of a federal building. It's the first time I've done something in a federal building. And if they like it and I can get away with it, I'm thinking about redoing this piece, but 50 feet tall, perhaps, if budget-wise. But I'm going to call it The Pursuit of Happiness. Federal, huh? What do you think? We'll see. Rainbow was mentioned. This was a commission for Sony Entertainment. And Sony is in the old MGM Grand lot that had, you know, the film there was Citizen Kane and Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. So my joke at first was for Gone with the Wind. I wanted to burn half the lot down, but they didn't go for that. So I made this rainbow. It's 94 feet tall by 188 feet wide. And so you can see it from pretty far. I mean, this is something I don't think I need to talk that much about. But, you know, when I'm making public work, I'm trying to make work for everybody. And that's important. This is a scene from Ray Donovan. It was in the background. So I love the idea of John Voight in my rainbow, the Midnight Cowboy. So And I mentioned I'm going to be in the upcoming Whitney Biennial, and this is a little sketch I did for it. And the idea is it's going to be a kind of a long wall, sort of fat wall or monument or monolith. It's 8 feet tall by 8 feet wide by 80 feet long. Underneath it, not that you'll see it, it's actually made out of 2 shipping containers put together. And the whole thing is covered in plexiglass panels, only 6 colors repeated, sort of like the rainbow. And then engraved, or etched, I guess you call it, laser etched into the surface all the way around it, 4 sides, is the name of almost 400,000 artists. It's called the Artist Monument. It's unbelievably thorough, and they're in alphabetical order. So artists I know who've had maybe one show 20 years ago, they're on it. And they're right next to Picasso, or it goes back to, I think, early 20th century. I know Manet is on it. Anyway, and that's it. So it's in the process. It's my idea of, the Whitney Biennial, it's something that I've, wanted to get in the past. It's embarrassing to admit. It's just one of those, like many things in the art world and many things in life, that you're either in or out. And I wanted to sort of challenge that, or kind of invite every artist in the world to be in the Whitney. So it sort of subverts the point of the biennial in some ways. But there's my little model I just made to get the colors right. But this gives you a sense of to really get it, you have to understand, are there any artists in here? A couple? Your names might be on it, I'm not sure. But it's very, very, very thorough. Okay, let's talk about the eye for just a minute, and that's probably going to be it. So why an eye? I talked a little bit about this before, so forgive me if I'm repeating. When I make a public piece, I wanted to make something that speaks to a lot of people. The eye is just one of those images that's been used throughout history over and over and over again. It's usually a symbol of power or of God or of consciousness. The pupil is called a pupil because through it you're a student of the universe. So here's an early eye imagery, the eye of Horus or the eye of Ra or the Egyptian eye. That was then co-opted by used by the Masonic, the Masons, as a sign of God, of the great architect. Totem poles. I'll tell the story real quick. In all my research about eyes, a couple of things. Based on totem poles, there were some behavioral psychologists that set up a test at a university. You go to a university, I don't know, they give people $20 or something. People have to take a little test, a little series of questions on a computer. The tests have, you can find the answers really easily. You press a couple buttons, it gives you the answers. Well, based on that, they had some people taking the test and then just straight, and people cheated a little bit. They pressed those buttons to find the answers. And then they did some where they just had a drawing at the top of the computer, just a little thin line with 2 eyes at the top of the computer, and cheating went down by 30%. Same kind of test in a office that has a volunteer tea service. You give a quarter and you make yourself a cup of tea. Well, they found people were cheating and just taking tea and not leaving a quarter. Put a picture of eyes up on the wall, cheating went down 30%. Put a picture of flowers on the wall, cheating went up 30%. So what that all means to me is that eyes we're hardwired, and that eyes have this, we can't help but have them affect us or have meaning. And then, of course, there's the surrealist eye. I think they're using it more for psychological reasons. This is called The False Mirror by Magritte, of course. Another Magritte. And then, of course, Salvador Dali. He uses the eye a lot. And I think of this piece as a kind of a vernacular or pop surreal piece. In a way, I'm trying to put you, there was this great moment where this group, they opened the gates and this group sort of slowly walked towards the eye. It looked like some bizarre cult or something. But, it looked like this in some ways. This was Dali's, from Spellbound, his collaboration with Disney. And of course, the famous scene from the collaboration with Dali and Buñuel. This is the Eye of Sauron. Somebody reminded me of that from Lord of the Rings. And this is, of course, The Residents, which was a good band. So, and then there's the eye that's on, I think if you look back at my notebooks from high school, I probably have flaming eyeballs on them. And that's a terrible image to end with. So I think that's it, unless you have some questions for me.